Good evening, everybody. My name is Petru. Probably seen me around here before. The title for my presentation today is Ionic build tools in Docker. It's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised about what I'm going to talk. I'm assuming most of you know what Docker is, or sorry, Ionic. Let's start with the beginning. Most of you know what Ionic is. You use it for building mobile applications. It's set to write one single code base, and then you can use that code base on different platforms like Android, iOS, and the likes. Ionic, it depends on several different build tools because it's actually a collection of tools that you use for building mobile applications. It first of all depends on Node.js. It's mostly a JavaScript tool, Ionic. On Ionic itself, of course, it also depends on Cordova. And in the particular case of developing Android apps, it depends on the Android Sdk, which itself also depends on Java and a build tool called Gradle right now. And let me tell you a story. So let's assume that you're a developer working for a company, or maybe you're a freelancer, you're doing your own work. And there's a customer one day that comes to you and says, oh, can you create a mobile app for me? And I want you to write only one code base and deploy it everywhere. And you say, okay, this is a perfect project for Ionic. I'm going to use that. And you start developing, you create the app. The customer is very happy. You add a lot of functionality. You put it on the market. The customer comes, pays. You go on vacation because you're tired of developing apps and you need a break. Then you come back. Maybe 1 year passes, everything is okay, the app works great, and then the customers come to you and says, okay, you remember the login button? It's blue right now. I would like you to make it green. And you say, yeah, sure, okay, that's an easy task. But in the meantime, maybe something happens, like you change your laptop, or I don't know, reinstall the OS, or you're just a cool guy and you want all of the time to have the latest version of all the NPM packages and SDKs and everything you want to be up to date. And then you go back to the project and you see that, oh, my project is not compiling anymore because I have one version of Ionic and a different version of Cordova, which requires a different version of Android Sdk, and it's a very, very tricky thing to match them and get them just right so that your code compiles and you can build an APK and upload it on the market, make your customer happy, right? So it's a pretty hard task to do, and it's really challenging, and the solution that I'm going to be proposing involves a blue whale. This is Docker. I'm sure that a lot of you heard of it. It's very similar to a virtual machine, but it's much faster because it doesn't open a new kernel. It just uses the kernel of the OS, and it's very light on memory. It's very cool. I'm not going to go into details here. The idea is that it's an environment that you can use to copy things over from one side to the other, and environments, very important, do not change, right? So what I was thinking, okay, what if I configure my Ionic build and development environment inside Docker? Because I want it to be portable and I don't want to care if I lose my laptop or if I'm using an online IDE or whatever. I just want it to work. I want to know that I've got an environment I can use anywhere, anytime. So configuring this image, that's what we call it, a Docker image. You start from a base image. In my case, I decided to go from a base image of Node.js, which is based on, I think, Ubuntu Linux. I used 8.11. There's a newer version, but it doesn't really matter. And there are a few steps that you need to configure in this file so that you have your environment working. It's very similar to shell script. You just have some like run commands, and then you just write shell script. First of all, what was needed was Java, because Android Sdk is based on Java, and I wanted to use the official version from Oracle. Second of all, NPM was already installed, and then I needed to go and install Ionic, Cordova. I also decided to put TypeScript in there because yeah, why not? Latest version runs with latest Angular. You're gonna need TypeScript. What I did at the end, cache clear force. NPM usually handles this by itself, but being an image that you build once, I want it to be as small as possible so that I don't copy over cached stuff and whatever. And then I once installed the Android Sdk. It's, I would say, a bit tricky because like it's like some funny URLs that you need to download. It's just basically a zip. You download it, unzip it, and set some environment variables into your container. And then there's the build tool, Gradle, that Ionic uses underneath to actually compose the APKs that you are going to deliver to your client. So basically that's everything that's needed. Of course, other tools can be added there depending on the requirements, but this is like the most basic setup that you can do. And with this image like this, you can build and also develop, right? You can use this image in multiple ways. Docker has like this huge ecosystem of tools. One of the tools that it has is called Docker Compose, and you just configure what you want to do when you start your image, right? In my case, what's important to note here, I want the image to start. I want to expose this port because you're in a virtual machine, let's say, and you want to open URL on your local machine. And also, very important, the command that you're going to use, if you're going to do development, you're going to probably want to do Unix serve. But again, everything is configurable and you can do whatever you want. You can also, after starting this image, you can connect to it and you can write your own commands inside. There's like a brand new shell, so you don't have any limits inside there. The code, I put it online, it's on GitHub. You can check it out. It's just a Docker Compose file and just a few other files that there are inside for configuring. Very basic, very simple. The idea would be to integrate this image with your Ionic projects. So you can do this in two ways. Either you can go to the Docker Hub and download the image and then extend it with your requirements, or you can just use it as this, or you can just take the compose file, the configuration file, add stuff that you want in there, and then just customize it by your needs. Few tips: do not try to integrate this with USB drivers. Why I'm saying this is because of the fact that it's usually pretty complicated to forward USB connections to virtual machines, and it's a lot of work, and in general you don't want to do this. It's more simple. Just have something locally installed if you want to, for example, see Android logs, or just want to do Android native debugging or something like that. And for deploying, you can use, Ionic has, again, its own huge ecosystem. There's an app on the market called Ionic Dev App. You just export a port. It's gonna detect it on your local network, and then you can just hot reload your app on the phone whenever there's a change. So it's really, really cool. You don't actually need the APK if you're just doing development. Few more tips. Our experience until now, what we saw working with Docker containers and Node in general, it's a good idea to embed your Node modules inside your Docker image. So we had a lot of situations where we created an image, we had some Node source code, and then we deployed it to whatever, doesn't matter where, and npm install just didn't do its thing. Like, Node is very awesome, and npm a lot of times sucks, unfortunately. So we didn't want to depend on any online repository, and we just copied over the exact same folder of Node modules and copy it back whenever you need it. So if, for example, you come back to the project in 2 years, you might find that some modules have been removed from npm, or others just the versions are not there. You don't want to depend on anything externally. Every time you do an update, because package.json changes, right? Every time you do an update, you want to update your image as well, so that you can make sure that you have the latest version, and if required, at any time you can go back to previous versions. So it's like more of a historical compatibility. And only use Docker as a build environment. So don't think about adding stuff like IDs inside of your Docker image or using Git and I don't know, configuring Git's credentials or any other credentials and then uploading the image to a public repository. You don't want to do that. It's better just keep it single responsibility, Docker image. We're using it for build, we're using it for development, nothing else. And I guess that's it. If you have any questions?
Yeah, about the USB thing, you mentioned it's hard to mount stuff.
Yeah.
If you try, I don't know on like Mac or Windows, but I'm fairly certain on Windows you can just mount dev/whatever the USB is into the image and it will work. I'm almost certain about that. So like you mount a folder on the home on your system into an image, you can just mount dev/whatever the USB is.
I had a lot of bad experiences with this, to be honest. First of all, it's a different Linux environment, right? So you kind of need some native packages to be installed there, and it's a thing with forwarding connections. I tried that before, didn't work that well. It might be the case that right now they simplify things, but in my experience,
in theory it should work because it's just a file, quote unquote, right? Because
yeah,
everything on Linux is a file, so that's why I'm guessing I never actually tried. But
yeah, and what you want to do in these cases is, for example, why would you mount a USB connection? You might want to like install or use the Android SDK to check out logs or do some debugging or stuff like that. Those are the general tools that I would recommend to keep them on your local environment and not go and install them inside your Docker and then just, I don't know, forward graphical connections or stuff like that. Or also think of how you would be doing development if you're using an online IDE, like for example Code9 or something. You're not going to have USB connections there, right? So it's not going to work in those kind of situations.
Also, one more thing you mentioned, you shouldn't install anything but your build environment. If you install Emacs, then you can actually write code in there as well.
Yeah, of course you can. It's like
so you have the whole thing portable.
Yeah.
So one project with everything you need.
One huge project that solves all problems, right?
Solve that problem.
Yeah. Also, I told you you can also forward graphical connections, but I don't know. I just prefer keep them separate, single responsibility, following the patterns of microservices, stuff like that. It's maybe just a personal preference. Of course, it's like computing, it's IT. You can mostly do anything you want. It's also a matter of good practices. Yeah.
Related to that, how given that facts, what's the best way to debug your application?
Depends what you want to debug. If you want to debug, for example, the JavaScript code inside your Ionic application, usually IDEs will come with some debug tools. If not, you have Google Chrome, and Google Chrome can connect to your application, and then you can do some debugging over there. When it comes to Android native applications, then you're probably going to need something from the Android's, I don't know, SDK, or usually you would use the Android Studio, which is the official IDE for developing application, and Android Studio comes with everything packed inside, so all of the tools you would need. But then you're going to need, as I mentioned, the physical connection to the USB, connect to it, and just let the native drivers do their work.
For iOS, you don't need the looking?
I would like to say that there's a similar solution for iOS. The deal with Docker is it's kind of very specific to Linux. So you can run it on Mac, you can run it also on Windows, but what it's going to do is basically just going to create a mini virtual machine with Linux and just run Docker inside there, right? So when it comes to iOS, then for building you're going to probably need the SDK for building iOS apps, which will not run in a Linux container. It's going to need a Mac environment, so it's not really compatible. Maybe at some point I've heard rumors, or maybe there is, I don't know this for sure, native Docker containers for Mac. So in that case, it would be easy if you can just boot another container with Docker using the same kernel as Mac, and then you can just install any SDK for iOS development.
So this is strictly for Android only?
It's strictly for Android at this point, yeah.
Do you use this to also make your debug builds? Like if you want to test, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can use it for debug, you can use it for building production.
But then you use an Android, the Android Studio, right, to debug, yeah? And that can be like a different version that's out of sync with the one that's building, right?
So usually when developing Ionic applications, you're gonna want to debug JavaScript, because that's what we're writing. We're writing JavaScript there, right?
Okay.
When you debug JavaScript, the simplest thing is just go open up Google Chrome and you're gonna connect to the phone and you can debug it from there. If you're gonna do things like write native plugins, like for example, let's say you have, I don't know, you want to access the Bluetooth of the phone to do some external connection, and then you're gonna write a native plugin with Java, and you're gonna connect it through Cordova, and you're gonna write some logs, and you want to debug the native plugin, right? In that case, the browser will not do the job, right? So in that case, you're gonna need Android Studio to connect and do all of the debugging.
Are you multiple developers working with this Docker image?
Yeah.
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 And for instance, if you want to build like for production,
Okay.
build of the Android app, right? Where do you keep the certificates? Because both developers need to use the same certificates in order to sign the APK to generate the signed APK for deployment. So it needs to be in a shared space or somewhere so both of them share the same certificates. Like where is it
Okay.
stored?
I will talk in theory how you should do this. You have multiple ways. The best way when it comes to building, the recommended pattern is to use like a build server, right? Like something like Jenkins or some central place that you would build, because you don't want to be dependent on local environment, having configured Docker and having the commands to run and everything like that. So you would use a build server, and the build server would have some automation that would access the certificates from a third-party location. That can be an FTP server, which is secure. That can be a Git repository, which is different and it's secure, or an S3 connection in Amazon or whatever. So you're just gonna keep it in a, or maybe also there's tools like Vault for keeping secrets. So there's a lot of tools for keeping different types of secrets out there. Some of them are specialized, right? So you're just gonna access those, bring them to your build server, spin up the Docker image, mount the certificates on it, build the APK, and then just destroy everything and give the APK back as an artifact. Of course, you can do this also locally, but then when your developer goes away and then you have to take over the project, oh, it's not working on my machine, right? Because it's also some steps for doing this. Okay, so we're gonna take a break. If you have any more questions, we can talk then. Thank you.